Today, we're going to hear from Russell P. Baker. He's the retired archival supervisor and former acting director of the Arkansas State Archive in Little Rock. Since 2013, he has been the senior editor of the Arkansas Family Historian. He has served on the board of directors of the Arkansas Genealogical Society for many decades. He's also the author of two of AGS's most popular publications, the Arkansas Township Atlas and Arkansas Post Offices, from, I'm going to butcher this, Memdag to Norsk, a historical directory, 1832 to 1900. Over the years, he has frequently lectured nationally on genealogical research and theory. Thank you so much, Russell, for being here, and we are delighted to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Allison. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. What a great privilege to be with you today to share a few minutes of discussion with you about a topic that I am very passionate about, as you will see. It is the natural state of Arkansas Genealogical Society. Now, natural state is one of our state's current nicknames. More on that in just a minute. I am the current editor of the Arkansas Family Historian, and I urge you to consider joining the society and getting your own copy 4 times a year. Let's start with a few factoids about Arkansas. Arkansas is a southern state with a current population of about 3 million. And the first Europeans to set foot in what's now Arkansas were the Spanish under De Soto, the conquistadors. In the 1540s, they didn't stay around very long. They were replaced by the French, who about 1700 began to settle not only Canada, but the entire Mississippi River Valley. A good date to remember in Arkansas history and U.S. history is 1763. That's the year France lost all of its North American land holdings in a war with England. But they didn't cede them to England, they ceded them to Spain, who's England's ally. The Spanish never did have much presence in Arkansas, but then during the Napoleonic Wars, France conquered Spain, and France suddenly got back all of its French Louisiana territories. But Napoleon Bonaparte always scrapped for cash. In 1804, decided to sell all of French Louisiana to the United States. So our country acquired the entire middle portion of the continent, from the mouth of the Mississippi all the way to just above the just above the Canadian border, and all the way to the headquarters of the Missouri River. Arkansas was part of the Louisiana Territory till 1814. Then it became a part of the Missouri Territory. Then in 1819, as Missouri was getting ready to become a state, the Arkansas Territory was cut off between Louisiana and Missouri. And in 1819, that area extended some way into eastern Oklahoma. Then in 1836, Arkansas became the 25th state in the Union. And the rest, they say, is history. Arkansas, as you can see on this map, is a rather small southern state compared to some of its neighbors, especially to Texas, which is the size of Ukraine. But Arkansas has paradoxically a rather significant and large genealogical footprint, and we're going to talk about that for a few minutes. One of the things that caused early settlers to come to Arkansas was its extremely varied topography, the most varied in any southern state for this size. The area from the Mississippi River all the way over to Little Rock is the Delta, the Mississippi River alluvial plain, and it is some of the richest farmland in the United States and the #1 producer of rice in the United States. Then Arkansas, believe it or not, has 2 mountain ranges, and these are the most significant mountain ranges from the southern Appalachians to the Rockies. In northwest Arkansas, there are the famous Ozark Mountains, then the Ouachita Mountains to west Arkansas, and Arkansas River Valley in between them, and then the southwest part of Arkansas is the West Gulf Coastal Plain, sandhills and pine trees and extremely fertile soil. Arkansas, believe it or not, is one of those true Southern immigration routes. It's like the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, or Old Rowan County, North Carolina, or Pendleton District, South Carolina. And the reason so many immigrants from the Old South who were moving west came through Arkansas is because the high Ozark Mountains to the north and the swamps in Louisiana funneled them through Arkansas. It's not unusual to find your family living in Northeast Arkansas in 1850, and in Central Arkansas in 1860, and in Southwest Arkansas in 70, and then in Texas or in Oklahoma. And why is Arkansas called the natural state? I have to put a little plug in here. Most of Arkansas's mountain areas have been protected for decades by being part of the National Forest System. And this is a view in the Ozark Mountains, the famous Hawksbill, and that is not me sitting on the rock. For those of you who've done research before, who've not done research before in the South or in Arkansas, you'll find that a lot of places within our state and other southern states are what we call records deserts. There are communities, there are regions, and there are entire counties that have very few records before 1900. So I recommend, when I teach classes, beginner classes on genealogy, and to you tonight, that you sit down and formulate a good research strategy before you start out. Who am I looking for? Were they here before the Civil War, after the Civil War, before 1900, or after 1900? And of even more importance, and we'll get back to this, is where were they living? So let's begin looking for your family and my family in the natural state. There are 5 essential groups of records for Arkansas genealogical research, and these are no surprise. There are vital records, birth and deaths. There's the U.S. Census records, county records, newspaper files, and then military and service records, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of those. Before you visit, though, before you begin your research, I invite you to visit the website for the Arkansas Genealogical Society. Their address is on your handout material. And check out free, it's a free service, the back files of the Arkansas Family Historian from 1962 to 2016. This year we'll be adding 2017 to our web presence. And the back files of the Arkansas Family Historian, the volumes and a lot of the issues have a full name index, and they constitute the largest single collection of published genealogical material assembled in one place relating to Arkansas. And you may find something, hopefully you'll find something on your family already published in there. Now, let's spend a few minutes, excuse me, while I get set here, talking about vital records. I'm going to talk about marriages and divorces when we talk about county records, which is the origin of those records. We'll talk about births and deaths, though, and then we'll talk about adoption records. And like most southern states, when we talk about birth and death records, there's good news and there's bad news. Very few southern states were keeping birth and death records officially before 1900. Arkansas's magic date is 1914. However, many of the county officials who were supposed to send in information on births, deaths, and even divorces didn't get around to doing that until after World War II. So it's not unusual at all not to find a birth and/or death record in Arkansas during this time period. A good strategy is look for birth and death records for all members of the family, and you might be lucky. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that several years ago, members of the Arkansas Genealogical Society Board of Directors made a trip to the Arkansas Health Department. Their address is on your handout material, who are the holders of all of the original birth and death records that were filed in the state of Arkansas. And what they found, to their astonishment, was a collection of over 500,000. I'm going to repeat that number: 500,000 delayed birth certificates filed in Arkansas for births before 1914. Before 1914. These in Arkansas have a strange name. They're called the prior birth records, but they were completely useless because there was no index to them and there was no database for them. So volunteers sat down and over the decades created a complete database to these 500,000 delayed birth certificates. These are available in published book form, and they're about 17 volumes. I'm sure they're available at the Allen County Library. But the Genealogical Society has just published a new thumb drive, very inexpensive one, that gives you the access to the entire database. You can search it by birth name, you can search it by mother's maiden name, and you can even search it by county. Adoption records in Arkansas were, until very, very recently, not available to the public. But now, adoptees over the age of 21 can go to the Arkansas Health Department, their address is on your handout, website, and download a form and get at least some of their adoption records. Beginning in the 1960s, individuals and local groups across Arkansas began to collect headstone and record headstone inscriptions. They collected some very good work was done in some counties, others not so good. These collections are available at the Arkansas State Archives, and you can download a guide to them, a free guide to them at their website. Beginning in the 1970s, a lot of the local genealogical and historical societies began to publish hard copies of cemetery inscriptions. Here's one for one of the southern Arkansas counties. Not only does it have the headstone inscriptions, but it also is annotated and has these wonderful maps. However, most of these volumes are out of print now. You may have to plan a visit to the Arkansas State Archives to be able to use them. And you can always go back to Find a Grave, which is pretty good for Arkansas. However, word of caution, the annotations that people have added underneath the tombstone inscriptions may or may not be correct. Take that with a grain of salt. Now let's move on to U.S. Census records, the cornerstone of American genealogical research. Without them, we'd be like our poor colleagues in Australia who took censuses, but they don't have any of them available. But ours are available from 1790 now to 1950. There are indexes to Arkansas census records on both familysearch.org, which is a free internet site, and ancestry.com, which is a subscription site. Word of caution, though, no printed census index or internet census index is absolutely complete. Names are misinterpreted, misspelled, or sometimes they were so difficult to read, the indexer simply left them out. So I would suggest we may have to in this case, if you don't find your family listed, and they should be in Arkansas in the census year, fall back on the internet sites which allow you to search page by page through the censuses like we used to do using microfilm. Because most of Arkansas, even for the 1950 census, is extremely rural, and it's very searchable. And to do that, you're going to have to know the location. In fact, that's the key to locating most Arkansas records is location, 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 and I'll keep returning to that. However, one thing you can do, Arkansas counties, and there are currently 75, I'll talk about that in a minute. Each Arkansas county historically has been divided into subdivisions. They're called minor civil divisions by the Census Bureau. In Arkansas, they're called townships, not to be confused with towns. Some southern states are called districts, and sometimes they're called, have other names. But Arkansas, they're always named townships. So if you were looking for your family, they should be in Grant County, let's say in 1900, but they're not on the index, but you know they lived near Sheridan, the county seat. By looking in my township atlas, which is only available from the Arkansas Genealogical Society, and I've never made a penny for their sales. The sales go directly into the treasury of the Genealogical Society. If you know they lived in Sheridan, you can look in a township that has a beautiful name. It's Mary Green Township. I have lived long enough now that I can brag by the fact that I am listed on the 1950 census with my brother, my mother, my father, and my grandmother. But my grandmother's name is horribly misspelled, which is one of the cautions of using census records. In my estimation, the very best census for Arkansas, because it's very easy to use and very readable, is the 1900 census, because it gives you the month and year of birth of each individual who says there are no birth records in Arkansas before 1914. It gives the month and year of birth. It tells how many years a couple have been married, how many children a woman's given birth to, and so forth, birthplace of person, father, and mother. And then work back through the censuses from known information toward the unknown. Arkansas was a part of the United States in 1810 and 1820, but there are no census records for them. Attempts have been made to reconstruct the missing 1820 census for Arkansas using some published materials with varying results. If you go to Arkansas Research Inc., which is a private company, you'll find some of those listed there. One of the great skills that always has helped me with my research, in fact, I have a whole lecture on this, is learn to analyze the census. Remember, the census is not just a miscellaneous collection of names and ages. It is a snapshot of your family on a specific day, in a specific year. And not only is it a snapshot of your family, it is a snapshot of the community in which they live. Here's a transcript from one of the mountain counties in West Arkansas that's now in the Ouachita National Forest, always very sparsely settled. And here are about a dozen families that appear on this page. A couple of the families have the same last name, and we will surmise that they have a relationship to each other, but there's another important clue. It is learning to read the migration patterns. And that is the places of birth listed for each individual, especially the children. And this page has a recurring pattern, which is always a flag for us to find more information. That pattern is South Carolina, Georgia, and Arkansas. South Carolina, Georgia, and Arkansas. This is 1860. If we go back to Georgia in 1850, we find that these same families are living in Lumpkin and Havisham and Cherokee counties in Georgia, north of Atlanta. If we go back to South Carolina in 1800, these families are living in Old Pendleton District, because these families are all interrelated and they are moving together by generations from time to time, to place to place. And it's a good skill to acquire. And the 47,000-pound elephant in the room is the 1890 census. Of course, none of it for Arkansas has survived, but the Arkansas State Archives, and their address is on your handout, has in their microfilm collections a set of county tax records and other county records as well, of a set of Arkansas county records that go up to about 1890 to 1900 for every county. And there are two sets of these records which allow us to reconstruct some of the information from the missing 1890 census. One of these is the real estate tax book that lists all males and females in the county who own property, that is, own land. The problem with that is in that many of our minority communities, especially in East Arkansas, many African Americans did not own land. So it's of limited use. However, the best one is the personal property tax book. the PP book, the personal property tax book, as you see on this abstract, it lists every adult male in the county, every female who owns personal property, that's a horse or a cow, and even mentions probates that were in progress during that time. So here is a transcript from the 1890 Perry County personal property tax book. Perry is just in the mountains, just west of Little Rock. Here in the enlarged area is V.T. Brazel, as it's pronounced in Perry County, and he lives in Appleton Township. That's the township. If you went to my township atlas, you'd be able to pinpoint exactly where in the county he lived. Under him is William Brazel, who lives in another township, Maumelle. Is that near Appleton? But there's an important notation following his name. His taxes were assessed in the year before, in 1889, but he didn't show up to pay his taxes because he is dead. These are the annotated paid personal property tax books. And if we go back a couple of years, he shows up, but in this year he has died, and he may not have a probate of his estate because he may not have owned any property. Wonderful, wonderful records. And there are some abstracts of them that have been published. There may be a few at Allen County Library. The largest collection of the abstracts, there's no statewide index yet, are at the Arkansas State Archives. And there are school census indexes, school district censuses for selected Arkansas counties. Unfortunately, not all 75 counties, but you can check the state archives. They're in their microfilm collections, and they're by county and then by school district. So here's Flat Rock School District in Cleburne County, north of Little Rock. And yes, there is a Flat Rock in Arkansas. Here in this particular household is a list of all the children between the ages of 5 and 17, and it gives their birth information. Who says there are no birth records in Arkansas before 1914? Now, let's move on to some special censuses. Arkansas is blessed because it does have its mortality schedules. These are special parts of this regular census, which were done in 1850, 60, 70, and 80, and their list of people whose death was reported those years, not the years in between. These are available at the Arkansas State Archives. There is an old set of abstracts to these, but unfortunately it is out of print now. Some of them you might find on Ancestry or Family Search. Now, the question that someone's going to ask me, are there any state census records for Arkansas? Yes, there's one. In 1829, there were others taken, but the records have been lost, unfortunately. The 1829 state census is much like the 1830 U.S. Census. Well, let's move on then to Arkansas county records. It's interesting that the county government, the government on the county level, is the government that our ancestors interacted with on a very regular basis. They hardly ever interacted with state government in Arkansas and almost never with the federal government except during wars. But it's the county that created the records of marriages and divorces, of probates, of deed records, created those tax records that we looked at. And there are even other courts that we'll talk about. Arkansas currently has 75 counties. At one time, there was another county down in southwest Arkansas called Old Miller County, but when they drew the state boundaries, they found out that area was actually in Texas and in Oklahoma. So let's look at some of these records. Marriage records begin in the territorial period. There are some indexes, which you'll find on one of the websites that we've talked about, and the state health department has some indexes from about 1920 on, but they're not complete. The complete marriage records are at the county level. The early ones just give you the name of bride and groom and the date and the officer officiating, much like in Tennessee. But after the Civil War, Arkansas began requiring grooms to post bond to get married since it's a legal contract. And so these later marriage records have a great deal of information. And oftentimes the bride's and groom's residence is identified not by their post office, but by their township. Look in the township atlas, check all the names that you find in these records. Will and probates. I'm sure that all of you are very familiar with their use. Excuse me while I lose my voice. Not many people in Arkansas who died had a will. There's still not a lot of people who have a will. But everyone who owned real estate and everyone who was in a business usually or in a profession had a probate of their estate because they had property and money. And these probate records are in the courthouses, in the county clerk's offices, and they usually give you date of death, or at least a time period of death. And there are bonds and letters of administration and guardianship and executorship that are full of names, as Elizabeth Schoen will say, of friends, relatives, and neighbors. And don't forget to check the probate court record. This in Arkansas is the court that disgruntled heirs would sue each other on to make sure they got their fair portion of grandma's estate. Lots of estate information in the probate court records. The state archives has a good collection of these early records in their microfilm archives. Now let's talk about land and property. Land is actually historically of great value to counties because it is a source of tax revenue. So they want to make sure that land was owned and was passed from generation to generation in a very systematic way. Arkansas, unlike the other older southern states, is a public domain state. That means that since we bought the land from France, that the federal government is the owner of each parcel of land in Arkansas, well, nearly every parcel of land in Arkansas, and the federal government granted or homesteaded land to individuals. There, and this address, which I'm going to give you, is on your handout material. There is a free website operated by the Bureau of Land Management. This is very similar to the Midwestern states, that you can check to see if your ancestor either had a homestead or had a land grant. And that's beautiful address as GLO Records, GLO, General Land Office Records, BLM. You can check it by state, you can check it by surname, and you can even check it by county. And if you find someone, it gives you the legal description of the property, section, range, and township, which then can be plotted on a historic map from the Arkansas Highway Department. Deed records are always tedious to go through, but you should go through them, and I suggest abstracting out the name, the dates, the legal description. Again, that'll tell us where the land was, and get the names of all the witnesses. In Arkansas, every Arkansas county, there is an index to deeds by grantor, which is the buyer, grantee, which is the seller. Early ones are available at the Arkansas State Archives. Now, the piece de resistance for early Arkansas settlers are the early tax records from 1820 to about 1868, territorial period that just passed the Civil War. These tax records are as good as the tax records for early Texas and early Kentucky. Wonderful for southern states. And they just barely survived the Civil War. They're even available for the counties where the courthouses have burned, because this is the state's copy that they kept. They're by year, they're more or less in alphabetical order by the last name, the first letter of the last name, and they're year by year by year. You can use them to find out when the family moved to a county and when they left, or when someone even died. There are no overall indexes for them, but they're very easy to use if we know the location, the county. And these are available, or at least many of them are available on familysearch.org. I've left a formula in your handout so you can find out what they're available. I use them very, very frequently. Now, there are several other courts in Arkansas that you should not neglect. There's the county court, which is the county executive. They make sure the roads are repaired and the roads are fixed and the bridges are repaired. But periodically during the year, the county clerk recorded the names of delinquent taxpayers. And this is important because it will help you know when someone left the county. In fact, many of them are notated, and it says, in many cases, says, gone to Texas, gone to Texas, gone to Texas. Another court you need not to neglect is the circuit court, which in Arkansas is the criminal court. You may do like I did. Surprisingly, I found a family member who was hauled into court and fined for disrupting public worship on the Holy Sabbath. And then the one that people mostly neglect, and they shouldn't neglect, are the chancery court records. These are again in the microfilm collections at the state archives. It is in the chancery court that you're going to find divorce records. And again, a lot of these clerks didn't send these into the state health department, but they're here in the chancery court records. You'll also find many, many disputes about unpaid bills or disputes about land boundaries, disputes between individuals. And I give you this advice in using Arkansas County records. Look at all available records for the time period when your family lived in that county. You may have to take a trip to the courthouse. And I found some wonderful little books in the attic or in the basement or even under the stairwell in courthouses. Even the Marks and Brands books, these little miscellaneous books, didn't make their way onto the microfilm collections. But look anyway. Also, for those counties where if families living in the counties where the courthouses are burned, and half of Arkansas counties have lost their records. 75 counties, half of them, you do the math. They lost them during the Civil War. They lost their records due to fire, to flood, to a whole spate of recent tornadoes, or just human neglect. So look in the records of the neighboring counties. There may have been a change in the county boundary, or your ancestor may have owned land in both counties. And if you go again to my Township Atlas, you'll find notes about the changes in historic county boundaries and also the historic township boundaries. Newspaper files are the diary of American life. They begin in the colonial period. What a wonderful resource, especially now that they're coming online in digital form. Arkansas's newspapers begin in 1819, although I don't think those really early ones are online yet. But there are two locations that have many of them in digital form, and that's the Arkansas State Archives. This address is in your handout material, and also the Library of Congress, their famous chronicling, I can't say that, Arkansas, chronicling America. And check out both of them because they don't necessarily have the same newspapers digitized. Since they're searchable, you can look by surname. Although remember, unless it's a pretty unusual surname, you're going to get a lot of hits. I found a lot of assistance, a lot of information by checking on dates of death. There may not be a named obituary, but there may be a notice of an accident or a murder. And also looking at the little community names like Redbird or Alf in the community news notes. Those are indexed as well. And don't neglect to look at obituaries, death notice from the territorial period on. And beginning in the 1880s and 90s, you'll find more than the occasional birth announcement and wedding announcement in these, I guess, again, community news notes. And don't neglect to look at the legal notices in newspapers, especially if your family lived in a county like Pike County where there are no records before 1895. But the newspaper file may go much further back than that. And periodically, the county official has to publish in a legal notice all the probate proceedings that are taking place during that time period. And this brings us, lastly but not leastly, to one of the major sources of Arkansas Genealogy, and that's Arkansas military and pension records. And as a retired college history professor, I find it outrageous that one of the most important events in American history, the American Civil War, 1861 to 65, has been relegated to sort of a non-event. But again, the records relating to this great conflict, both created during the war and afterwards, even up into the early 1920s, is one of the largest collection of genealogical material in the United States. And you can see why. Because some 4 million plus men served in the Union Army during the war, and some 2 million plus men served in the Confederate Army. That's 6 million people. This leads me to believe that it is the rare family that lived in the United States between 1860 and 1870 and beyond that was not touched directly or indirectly by this great conflict. That means there's going to be records that were created as well. Arkansas sent 48,000 men to serve in the Confederate Army, and that's a substantial portion of the adult male population in Arkansas in 1860. Arkansas also sent 8,000 men to serve in the Union Army, and this is very common for certain southern states. Men always check both indexes, Union and Confederate. Many men, as we're going to see in our examples, served in both armies. And several thousand African Americans also served in the Union Army in U.S. colored troops, USCT regiments. And there are published indexes to Confederate service records, both Union and Confederate, in book form. I'm sure Allen County has it. State archival agencies have it. Larger college and university libraries probably have it as well, both national indexes and state indexes. And there are indexes for both armies for Arkansas. Arkansas Research Inc. has some of those available for sale. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the kind of information that you might find in a Civil War era record. There are besides two armies, there are two sets of records. That means there's 4 possibilities for you. First are the military service records. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what may be in there, but the military service record tells you about the soldier. It's not going to tell us, almost never tells us about his family. It won't contain a birth certificate, but it may tell us about the soldier because he's the one who marched off to serve. It is the military pension records created both during the war and after the war that's going to tell us, yes, about the soldier and about his family, and sometimes in great detail. Here is a typical Arkansas Confederate soldier's record. By the way, I love this picture. This is not of this soldier, but here's a guy who who served in a Confederate unit from Arkansas early in the war, and all that has survived is his enlistment record. And that's about all of it. All there is, except it gives us, Mr. Copeland, it gives us his age. Some of these records, if you are really lucky, in 1862, the Confederate government began to give discharge records to men over the age of 40 and also disabled veterans, and they sent them home. And these discharge records contain a great deal of information on the soldier, including age, place of birth by county and state, and a physical description. They're not available for all soldiers, but look for them. And again, look for all family members, not just the guy that's your direct ancestor. They're very, very rare, but worth looking for. There are no medical records in Arkansas Confederate servicemen's records. However, there are a lot more information. There is a lot more information in a typical Union Army military service record, a federal service record. Here's that same guy, Mr. Copeland. Here we find out his first name is Alexander. Before that, we just had his initials. He served in the 3rd Arkansas Cavalry US as opposed to 3rd Arkansas Cavalry CS. Entering rank is private, leaving rank is private. What tickles me is records of men who entered as a lieutenant and left as a private. And this man has 14 or 15 pieces of paper in his file. All these little numbers are not service record, not dog tag numbers. They didn't have military service numbers back then, but those are just the abstracted documents that were collected for this man for his file. 2 original documents, and at the bottom is notations having to do with the fact that he and his widow applied for a pension. And this is just the beginning of his file. Now, where do you get these? In the Confederate service records for Arkansas, you can get them from the Arkansas State Archives. You can also get them from the National Archives, which on its website, which is on the address is on your handout, you can check there. They have an index for Civil War service. The National Park Service, which I did not put on your list because I just thought of it, the National Park Service at their website also has a good index to military service during the Civil War. And all the state archives, as well as Arkansas, have indexes. And you can get those Arkansas military service records from the state archives in Little Rock. You can order them from the National Archives. It may take a while to get them from the National Archives, but they are doing that again. Oh, before I forget it, oftentimes you will find medical records in a Union Army record. Also, you will usually find an enlistment document, which again has a physical descriptions, no photographs, a discharge record, and a lot of other very personal information. Now, let's talk about the pensions given during and after the Civil War. Since there are 2 armies, there are 2 possible sets of pensions. The first one has a name which is a misnomer. It's the Index to U.S. Military Pensions, 1861 to 1934. Whew, what a name. This is available on Ancestry.com and I think Family Search as well. This really, if you look at the dates, this is really a list of all the people who received a pension, a military pension from the federal government between 61 and 1934. And the vast majority of these people are Union Army veterans and their widows. Tens and tens and tens, hundreds of thousands of them. Now here's the typical index. This is another member of my family who served both in the Confederate Army and the Union Army, for that matter, James J. Standridge. Here's his widow's name, and this is the index. His service information in the Union Army, he also served in the Confederate Army, and the information on the bottom requires a little explanation. The 1875 date is the date he applied for his pension. Now, the word under class is not invalid, it's invalid. Then there's an application number, then there's the certificate number. And if there hadn't been a certificate number here, that would mean he applied but didn't get the pension. But both he and in 1885, his widow applied for his pension. They both got it, and she was living in Arkansas. These pension records, and here is the front page of this guy's pension, just the front of his file. These pensions are available only from the National Archives. They are making photocopies again. They stopped during the pandemic for a while. This man's file is 60 pages plus. Some of these applications for union pensions can be 500 to 1,000 pages, depending on how difficult it was for veteran or widow to prove their service. But they are well worth obtaining. You'll want everything in them and look for other members of the family as well. This guy, one of the things recorded on just the front of his page is a list of all of his children, including the very last child, Margaret, who was born 3 months after her father's death. This man contracted tuberculosis during the war while in a Union POW camp. And he died soon after returning, after fathering all these children. It is this record that allowed Margaret, for a descendant of Margaret, to prove the age, the birth information for her ancestor to get into the DAR, because it's an official government record. Who says there are no birth records before 1814 for Arkansas? Because in these records, there are affidavits of birth, they're copies of marriage records. The government was very particular. They wanted to make sure all the pieces of information were correct. There are even affidavits from the neighbors who recount the story of this man's life. Now, you can get these approved pensions from the National Archives, but you can also get the ones who are not approved when they're just the applications. One of my sister-in-law's ancestors applied for her husband's Union Army pension. She never got it because it says on the pension says, you haven't furnished proof that you were divorced from your first husband. Her Union Army veteran was her second husband, but we got the pension applications with all the information in it. Union Army pensions, well worth the time and trouble. Now, let's move on to the other pension, which is a slightly different set of pensions. These are Arkansas Civil War pensions. The federal government never gave pensions to Confederate veterans or their widows, except those who were still living during the Depression era, Social Security time. And in fact, if you go to the National Archives website, they say, we do not have Confederate pensions. You get the Confederate pensions from the state in which the veteran or his widow was living when they applied, as long as it was a former Confederate state plus Oklahoma and not Maryland. Now I'm going to repeat that again. You have to, the soldier or his widow received a pension or applied for pensions in the state they were living in when they applied. That's who granted their pensions. Give you an example. One of my ancestral uncles, who was born in North Carolina, served in a North Carolina Confederate unit, moved to Kansas, and moved to Missouri, and then Kansas in 1900, ended up in Arkansas. He applied for a Confederate pension in Arkansas, got it. He then later moved back to North Carolina. He lost his Arkansas pension, but he got another one in North Carolina. A good rule of thumb is, where is the veteran and or his widow living on the 1900 census or the 1910 census? That's where you can apply, see if they got a pension. And I think all southern states, all ex-Confederate states plus Oklahoma, have on their websites at the archives or even the state library website, State Historical Society, indexes to Confederate pensions. There have been some published from Arkansas. Unfortunately, I think all of them are out of print again. But check with the state archival agency in Little Rock to see if your ancestor or his widow received a Confederate pension. Children of Confederate veterans were not eligible for pensions. Children of Union Army veterans could get a pension. Keep that in mind as well. Arkansas did not begin giving Confederate pensions till after 1891. Since they were given by the state, they started at different times. Even Oklahoma and Missouri and Kentucky gave Confederate pensions, but again, not Maryland because it never seceded. So the information varies from state to state. It will confirm the soldier's service record. And if the widow's applying, it gives her his date of death almost always. Sometimes it gives information about their marriage, especially if it's the second or third marriage. And then there is a certificate from the local physician who says these veterans are disabled. Now, if we think, how many of these Confederate veterans in the period from 1910 to 1925 were not disabled? They're all in the 70s and 80s. And there are also proofs of service from other people who served with these guys, proof of service, comrade at arms. Check all the names in those as well. Now, remember I said parts of Arkansas are records deserts? What am I going to do if it's one of those and I could name all of them, where the courthouse is burned? Well, the Arkansas State Archives has a wonderful collection of church records for Arkansas on microfilm. The records begin in the territorial period and go up some as late as the 1940s or 50s. You can download a guide to these church records on film at the State Archives website. It is free. This is a project that I helped with for many, many years. And depending upon the denomination, you may have some birth information, marriage information, even some death information, and a lot of family interrelated information. Another sort of statewide records that you might try to find are family Bible records. The back files of the Arkansas Family Historian are full of abstracts of early Arkansas family records, and remember, the volumes are indexed. And then the records created by the Masonic Lodge in Arkansas, which was the largest fraternal organization in Arkansas, have also been abstracted, and at least the deaths reported in their annual reports. The Arkansas Genealogical Society has Masonic death records in Arkansas 1838 to 1916, mostly after 1870, available in paperback form. Arkansas Research Inc. also has a lot of Masonic abstracts available from there. And there are other things, but the clock is ticking. I wrote this statement some 20 years ago, and I still stand behind it. Genealogy is not just a journey into the past. It's not just the collection of miscellaneous names and ages. Actually, it is a collection of information about the family, nuclear family, the extended family. And when we find information about the family, this leads us to inquire about information about the community in which our family lived. Where did the kids go to school? Where did they go to church? And it also leads us to inquire, even for much larger events, how did wars affect our family? How did famines, pandemics, depressions? So my contention is that genealogy is more than just a journey into the past. It indeed is a pilgrimage where we learn more and more and more about our families. And this brings me, at long last, to the end of my remarks. I want to thank you so much for your kind attention. And now I'm going to turn my remarks over to Allison, who will tell me what I need to do now.
Well, we have questions. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
I'm out of breath.
People have enjoyed it, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start going through some of these questions, and hopefully we can get through a lot of them. But we are a little bit short on time, so if we don't get to your question, please feel free to email us, genealogy@acpl.info, and we can try and help you get more information. Also, if you couldn't get the copy of the handout through the link, please go ahead and email us. We'll get you a copy. Also, this was recorded and will be on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it at a later date. So once it's edited, we'll get it up there. So thank you again. All right, you ready? Okay. Someone is curious what you know of early hot springs that may have been used for healing. There was a family lore that the baby got sick and that somebody took the child to a healing spring and they contracted meningitis and died. The only fact they had was the children were born in 1904 in Oklahoma.
It's entirely possible. The only problem is, although Hot Springs was in Hot Spring County, now Garland County, the courthouse burned in Garland County in the 1890s, and most all records and the newspaper files were destroyed. Sorry.
Okay. So a couple of people have asked about the thumb drive that you mentioned that's for purchase. They want to know where you can find that.
You mean that one?
Mm-hmm.
The Arkansas Genealogical Society address is on your handout, and their web address is you can order it online. I think it's only less than $20. But think 500,000 names to check.
That's pretty awesome.
Indeed.
Thank you. Okay. Um, Someone said that you did an article called Camping in Cold Bath. Um, they've not been able to find it. Where can you find that article?
Uh, well, that was a history of a church in Glenwood, my home church, Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, 1848 when it started. Unfortunately, it is out of print, but I think you may find it on the internet. Go to the church's website, Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, Glenwood, Arkansas.
Okay.
And rumor has it that it's going to be reprinting.
Oh, hey, that's good news for that person. Okay, thank you. Does the 1829 state census include information about the enslaved?
No. The tax books will tell us the number of slaves in a county by the owner's name, not their name, but the tax books will give us some of that information.
Okay. Someone is researching specifically in Pike County. Why are there no records before 1895, as you stated in the presentation?
The county is full of pyromaniacs. They burned the courthouse down. There are some early tax records, and there's a few other records. They have a good historical and genealogical society in Pike County. Go to US Gen Web and go to the page for Pike County, Arkansas.
Perfect, thank you. So this person has a fair number of relatives in the 19th or early 20th century who married in Arkansas, but resided in Texas or Louisiana. Did Arkansas have different, easier marriage laws?
Yes, and this is very common throughout the 20th century. Laws vary from state to state. Sometimes there was an age restriction, sometimes there was a residence restriction. Usually it's really easy to get both divorced and married in Arkansas.
Fair enough. Okay, this is interesting. My great uncle was supposedly the oldest Confederate veteran in Jefferson County when he died in 1937. I do have a copy of his Arkansas Confederate pension. How do we find out whether he might have gotten a pension from the federal government during the Depression?
Go to the Social Security death indexes and see if he's listed. I doubt that he did, but try that.
Okay. In which county court might one find a divorce filed in the early 1840s?
Arkansas from the very earliest period, because we had so few women in the territory, divorce records and other records about property ownership were very lenient. So look in the Chancery Court records to see if there's an early divorce. Sometimes in the acts of Arkansas, the legislature granted divorces.
Awesome, thank you. Someone's wanting to know if there's a database of African American cemeteries.
Not other than find a grave.
Okay. Do you have any idea where to find Woodmen of the World Grave Memorial application files?
Not in Arkansas. We're lucky to have any for the Masonic Lodge. It's another fraternal organization.
I wonder if they have an archive somewhere.
I don't know.
I don't
Not
know
in
either.
Arkansas. Not in Arkansas.
Fair. This person's grandfather was a minister in Arkansas in the 1920s. Did he have to register in the county to perform marriages?
Yes, and they're in the county records somewhere. Some counties have a minister's credentials book. Some of those are on microfilm at the state archives, but they could be recorded almost anywhere in a county record, but they were supposed to do that.
Thank you. Someone's curious about figuring out how to figure out where the county lines changed in Northwest Arkansas. What would you recommend to look at?
Guess what? My township atlas will give you an idea of when the counties changed boundaries. There's
Perfect.
also a site on the handout. There's a website that you can look at as well.
Thank you. Is it possible to get copies of Big Rock prison records?
The state archives has some state prison records to begin in the 1880s. Unfortunately, they are not indexed. You'd have to go to the archives to look at them so far. Maybe someone will sit down and post them for us.
That would be nice. Okay, well, thank you. Someone's wondering how to do research in Texarkana. Is it in Texas or Arkansas?
Yes, half and half, but it's in Miller. Part of it's in Miller County, Texas, and there are good county records at the state archives and good newspaper files as well.
So basically saying both places at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so last one, guys. Somebody says one of their family members was on the example from the Arkansas tax records slide. They're wondering where that came from, that page. You used their family.
I think that's those early tax records, which are at the state archives. Because
That's
they are,
awesome.
some of them are also, the early ones are also on familysearch.org. A little difficult to get to, but they're there. Make a trip to the natural state. You can stand on that rock looking over the mountains.
Wow. Okay, one last question came in, so we're just going to answer this one and then we're done. In 1964, Independence Day, I heard my uncle, African American, and his daughters were given poisoned hamburgers. One of the daughters died in Little Rock. Where could I find this story?
I'm not sure. You might start with see if there's a death certificate for that person, which will give you a date. And there was an African American newspaper, which I think is online now at the state archives that you can check.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, that's the end of the questions for today. I will say if we didn't get to your question or if you think of something later, please send us an email, genealogy@acpl.info, and we'll do our best to answer you or ask Russell for help. So thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. Everybody has been incredibly pleased. So thank you.
You'll have to have me back.
Yes, we will. Thank you. Everybody, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time it is where you are. And we'll see you again on Tuesday for our next program. Bye, everybody.
Bye.